you've got a woman who's going through perimenopause and has all of these symptoms as well every day, let's say. And then she's going through this 4-week cycle where some weeks are great, some weeks are less great. How does that work in conjunction? Is it just a really big pile up of a disaster? Or, because it sounds it when you have all of these things and then you add in, gosh, like I'm really feeling terrible, my period's due or whatever it is. How does that kind of manifest itself?
So to kind of understand that, we need to kind of lay down what a normal menstrual cycle is, right? So a normal menstrual
Please do.
cycle. So to understand a normal menstrual cycle, let's imagine we pulled off the street a 25-year-old and we dissected her biology. So the first thing we'd understand is that her whole hormone orchestra is under the control of her brain, right? Two areas in the brain called the pituitary and the hypothalamus are like the conductors of the orchestra of our hormones, right? Day one of her cycle, her pituitary in her brain wakes up and says, let's make a baby, and starts to release follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. FSH comes down to the ovary, wakes up the ovary and says, let's make a baby. And the ovaries respond by stimulating follicles. So all these follicles start to develop. Hundreds of follicles start to develop. A follicle is a tiny, tiny cyst with a developing egg in the middle of it. Those follicles make estrogen. Estrogen's job is to prepare the uterine lining for a pregnancy, make a nice cozy home for an embryo to implant in the setting of reproduction, right? So this is what we call the follicular phase. You're making lots of estrogen, all of the follicles are developing, your lining is getting thick, things are great. Come to the middle of the cycle, in your ovary, one of those eggs has won the race and become what we describe as the dominant follicle. Our pituitary in our brain knows that it's time, that one's ready and it's time to ovulate. So now it releases a burst, pulsed release of a hormone called luteinizing hormone, or LH. If you've ever peed on the stick to get pregnant, that's what you're looking for in your urine, this luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone comes down to this dominant follicle and it triggers it to rupture. So the follicle opens and sends the egg on its way. And then we're left in our ovary with this leftover follicle that I always describe to people. It kind of looks like a deflated balloon, right? Just like sent its egg on its way and now it's kind of like deflated. That now is called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is a really important job and it makes progesterone. And progesterone's job is to hold the uterine lining waiting for a pregnancy, right? They get a whole, if you've ever known anybody that's done IVF, after they do an embryo transfer, they give them high doses of progesterone. Why? Because we want to hold that lining in place and not have a period, because we're going to lose everything we put in there if we had a period. So we're making progesterone. Our brain is listening for any embryo hormones, right? Do we have a fertilized embryo? Is it making any hormone? And our brains are listening. Our pituitary and our hypothalamus are listening. We come to day 5, 6, 7, 8. There's no baby hormones. So it says, nope, there's no embryo hormones. So we must not be pregnant. Start again. So it drops our hormones. So our progesterone level drops and we shed the lining and the whole thing starts again. So that's a normal menstrual cycle, a very predictable rise and fall of estrogen and progesterone. What happens in perimenopause, like I said, is you're running out of eggs. So now your pituitary wakes up and says, let's make a baby, and releases that follicle stimulating hormone. And your ovarian response is maybe 6 eggs. So 6 follicles start to develop. So not a lot of estrogen is being made, right? So your estrogen level is low. But in the meantime, your pituitary knows that you're not making enough estrogen. So it's pushing your ovary to try to find more. And what happens is it'll find more, 1 behind the door and 3 in a dark, dusty corner and 1 outside. And now we have a situation in our ovary where we have multiple follicles in various stages of development layered on top of each other. It's a whole big mess. Everything is out of sync. And what we see, therefore, is a rise in estrogen and a fall in estrogen. And a rise, we call that the zone of chaos. Then we come to the middle of the cycle and our pituitary is like, I guess we'll try to ovulate something. There's nothing to ovulate. It's a big old mess. So if there's no ovulation, there's no progesterone, right? So perimenopause is characterized by these very labile estradiol levels and very low progesterone levels. And in a setting of a menstrual cycle, it depends on how low your low is. Women are most symptomatic at their low. So early perimenopause, they're most symptomatic at that late phase, right? Because their valley is so low. But as things progress, it's low all the time. So they'll start with having symptoms right before their period. They're like, God, I'm so snappy. I'm angry. I'm irritable. My periods are heavy or they're longer. And then slowly the length of time they feel unwell gets longer and longer. And then it's throughout the menstrual cycle because overall the hormone levels are low.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And then we move on to the menopause, which is when, you know, your period stops is one of the symptoms, but not the best definition is what we know now. What actually then, like, manifestations are there in the menopause that we can look for? What's the difference between perimenopause and menopause?
So it's about eggs, right? So if you're not making any more eggs, then you're not going to have any periods. But if you're not making any more eggs, so if you don't make those follicles in your ovary, you're not going to make estrogen. And if you don't ovulate a follicle, you're not going to make progesterone. So you're going to make almost no estrogen and progesterone is being made, right? You're going for a very volatile, all over the place sort of picture in perimenopause to no hormone being made in menopause. And often we'll see, obviously, the period will stop, but all the symptoms worsen and become a little bit less labile. They're just there all the time. So the hot flashes are there all the time. The sleep disturbance is there all the time. Whereas previously, there might have been a little bit of a cyclical kind of nature to it.